So when the election to incorporate Monrovia and at the same time elect city officials, presuming the incorporation would go through, they elected 5 individuals to what they then called the Board of Trustees. It was that prior to being city council. They also, I believe, on the election on the ballot was a city treasurer, a city clerk, and a city marshal. And Tom Oglesby, I believe, was elected as the first city marshal. That would have been in December of 1887. One of the first orders of business after the council got organized was to begin passing ordinances. And I think ordinance number 4, I'd have to check, was to outlaw saloons, dram shops, and something else where spirituous liquors were served.
Tippling houses.
A tippling house, right. So they passed it, and it became law. And the immediate action after that was to close down the saloon. So the story is told that the council, together with the marshal, paid a visit to the saloon keeper, who was reported to be somewhat nervous about the visit, because I think he knew what was coming. He certainly knew the ordinance had been passed. So each one of the city trustees apparently ordered an alcoholic beverage. I don't know if the marshal ordered a beverage or not, but anyway, supposedly they consumed only enough of that to determine it was in fact alcoholic in nature. So they gave the city marshal the high sign, and supposedly he brought his fist down on the bar like this and said, "We all have incorporated and we all don't want you here and you're closed now." So that was Tom Oglesby, Monrovia City Marshal at his finest.
What was the city marshal's job supposed to be? Another ordinance said something about you can't lay in the street.
Oh, maybe his job was to go, roust out the bums who had fallen asleep on the streets and escort them to the city limits.
Was he basically the entire, what would
He
later
was
be
the
a
law.
police
Yeah.
department?
Yeah, one-man police department.
And then that job changed names over time?
Then there became a constable. Now, the constable might not have been just for Monrovia, it might have been for the township, which was an administrative jurisdiction larger than the city. It would have taken in, at least Monrovia, possibly Duarte. Chris Mariconda found somewhere a wonderful judicial map that showed the townships. And here was and Monrovia at one point was, in 1900, Monrovia was in the El Monte Township. And some of it, if you're doing research and looking at census records, it'll list someone as living in El Monte. Well, no, they didn't live in El Monte. They lived in the El Monte Township of Los Angeles County. So you need to know that and not be misled and think, well, I've not found the right person.
And we have the criminal record books from that era that
Right.
are from the El Monte Township that are
right.
Monrovia cases.
Yes. Yeah. So Jim Quiggle was the constable. And then they organized a real police department in 1925. I'm sure Jim Quiggle probably had deputies to assist him, but I believe John Wiley describes him as being the town constable. One story that Bill Quiggle, his son, told me, during Prohibition, his dad took Bill with him to raid a still. And I think the story was, it was on the second floor of a house. And Jim Quiggle took his axe with him and proceeded to chop up the still. and made sure that the liquid ran down the stairs so they would warp and they'd have to replace the stairway.
This was in Monrovia.
Yeah.
What was a township officer?
You know, that's a great question. I don't know that there was a township officer. I think it was more like an administrative division. I've hoped that there were in fact township officers, especially a medical doctor who was the township doctor who would have recorded births and deaths. Because when you try to find early birth and death records from Monrovia, it's very scanty. There are records at the Hall of Records in Norwalk, but they're very scanty.
Who kept the tax records? Because we have those.
Yeah, the city did.
Who at the city would have done that?
The city clerk or his deputy would have compiled the assessor's roll.
And there would have been a city clerk in 1887?
That was one of the elected positions, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, though the city clerk and the treasurer, city treasurer, and the trustees have continued as elected positions since then. The mayor has sometimes been chosen between the council members or sometimes elected. Currently we have an elected mayor. Prior to that, it rotated amongst the council members.
When did it change from being a board of trustees to being a city council?
Probably in the teens or 20s. Maybe even earlier than that. Yeah.
Who was on the original board of trustees? William Monroe.
Well, General Pyle. Who else? The reference is at hand, but I'm yeah. So there were several who ran, but Monroe and Pyle were successfully elected, as was Joseph Sartori. And who was the first clerk? Can't tell you right offhand.